Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Lockdown in Lockdown, part 16. I'm having a bad hair day today, sorry, even worse than normal, but what can you do in lockdown? There's nothing much you can do about it, really. I've just started reading Solitary yesterday. Alex has escaped from Furnace through the rift in the floor of the chipping room. He and Toby and Z and Gary jumped into a raging underground river. This river didn't turn out to be like a gentle escape from Furnace. This river is basically trying to kill them and dashing them against the rocks and trying to drown them. Also in the river are two of the warden's dogs who got sent down after them, but they've kind of been washed away downstream. Alex and the others have managed to climb up onto onto kind of like a little ledge of rock. There's only one light. Gary has it. Luckily it's still working. And, well, they are, what's the word I'm looking for? They are not in a good place, basically. So, this chapter is called Buried Alive. When you're scared, and I mean really scared, not just hearing a noise in the night or standing toe to toe with someone twice your size who wants to pound you into the earth, it feels as if you're being injected with darkness. It's like black water as cold as ice settling in your body where your blood and marrow used to be, pushing every other feeling out as it fills you from your feet to your scalp. It leaves you with nothing. That's how I felt sitting on the ledge. It wasn't the dogs that terrified me, and it wasn't Gary or the thought of being caught again. It wasn't even the idea that I might die shivering helplessly on the rock like some strange fungus. No. It was the thought of what might happen after death. I could accept my life ending, because there would be no more fear and no more pain. But what if death wasn't the end? What if some part of me, my soul perhaps, lived on? And what if it was trapped here in the guts of Furnace for the rest of time, never again to see the sun or hear the sound of laughter? It was that which made it seem like my body was a pit devoid of life and light. It was that which was driving me towards madness. We move that way, I said, more to chase away the voices in my head than because I had a plan. Light burned my retinas as Gary turned to look at me. I stuck out my hand, pointing down the slope in the same direction that the river ran below. Gary, you've got the light. You take the lead. Make sure you don't miss any passageways. One of them might be our way out. Might? Snapped Gary, as menacing as a pistol shot. But he obviously didn't have any better ideas as he scrambled to his feet and turned his head in the direction I was still pointing. His helmet lamp illuminated the narrow ledge ahead, which seemed to disappear into darkness far too quickly. Just take it slowly, I stammered as a shiver passed through my body, making every nerve end burn. Watch your feet. If you fall over the edge, then we're all screwed. Gary didn't answer, keeping his head forward as he shuffled carefully along the rock. His feet kicked scraps of stone over into the void, and I tried to ignore the sound of them hitting the foaming spray below. The river had let us live twice now, but I was willing to bet it wouldn't show the same mercy if we tumbled in again. Come on, I whispered, offering Z a hand and hauling him up before that idiot leaves us behind. We eased our way after Gary, treading carefully in his shadow and doing our best to peer past his enormous shoulders. Every step he took made the gloom along the wall twitch, and it was impossible not to think of the wheezers, the wardens, gas mask wearing freaks lurching and staggering like injured birds in front of us. Every time I saw movement, my heart hammered, which wasn't a bad thing, since fear seemed to be the only thing keeping it going. This isn't getting us nowhere, came Gary's uneven voice. It's all the same up here, no doors or nothing. You were expecting a door? I asked, unable to stop the haggard laugh breaking from my throat. He didn't reply, and he didn't turn around, but even so I swore I could feel the air thicken like he was about to explode. And he was right. No matter how many paces we took, the wall to our left and the pitch-black abyss to our right stayed exactly the same. Each stumbled movement forwards brought a fraction more light to the ledge up ahead, but it was also pinched it off right behind us. We could have been walking on a treadmill. The image brought back my terror of becoming a ghost trapped here for all eternity. Weakened to the point of insanity by everything that had happened, my mind started telling me that I was already dead, and that this was my personal hell. And it could have been. I mean, more than anything, our progress through the darkness reminded me of the times I had broken into houses and crept through the shadows while the owners were asleep, desperately trying not to make a noise and always panicking that I wouldn't be able to escape in an emergency. What could be a better punishment for a criminal like me than to be doomed to an eternity walking along a ledge in a pocket of light and air that constantly felt like it was shrinking? "Watch it!" came Gary's voice as I smacked into his back. "You try to push me over, I'll gut you if you try. You hear me?" I'd been so wrapped up in my own mortality that I hadn't noticed him come to a halt. I mumbled an apology, bracing a hand on the wall before stepping up on my tiptoes to see what had stopped him. The view was identical to the one that had greeted us for the last few minutes, except for a jagged scar running vertically down the wall. It cut straight through the ledge, splitting it in two, and resembling a crude crucifix. Like this was a massive cathedral, and we were trespassing on the altar. "Go on then," I said, no longer caring about antagonising him. "That might be it." "You go," he replied, his voice shaky. "Don't feel right." I wondered what had spooked him. The ledge ahead didn't look any more treacherous than it had all along, except further up where it had been sheared in half. The gaping wound in the wall was dark, but shadows couldn't hurt us. Then I heard it. A noise rising up above the mumbling roar of the river below. It was so loud that I didn't know how none of us had noticed it before. A whistle that rose in pitch like an old kettle before sputtering out and vanishing into its own echo. It's the wind," I said, but I was so unsure that it came out like a question. "That means we're near the surface, right?" came Z's voice from behind me. I shook my head. "There's wind in these caves just like there's water. Doesn't mean anything." The whistle came again, closer and louder and longer. Another rose up on the back of it, a shrill call that sounded more like a scream before being sucked back down below the thunder of the water. "It's wind," I thought to myself, trying to hammer the words into my head so hard that I wouldn't question them. The wind in the tunnels, caused by pressure changes in the water, right? But I knew that whatever it was we were hearing, it wasn't made by anything as innocent as air. More whistles, 3 or 4 this time, fighting each other for supremacy. Gary swore and turned to me, his pupils so large and the whites of his eyes glowing so fiercely around them that he looked like an animal. He whispered something that I couldn't make out, but I knew what his lips had spelled. "Wheezers." "Is it them?" asked Z, almost crying. "Oh, please God, not them." I shook my head until all thoughts of the freaks in gas masks had disappeared, then took a step forward. Easing myself past Gary, I made my way towards the crack in the rock, my heart so far up my throat that I could feel its beat on my tonsils. "It might not be them," I said over my shoulder as I reached the edge of the precipice. "It could be anything. We're just afraid. Paranoid. Forget about the noise, okay? We've just got to find a way out. We'll worry about the wheezers when we have to." A clutter of remarks met the end of my sentence, but nobody argued with it. I took that as a good sign, grabbing the edge of the cracked rock and peering around it. The scar was maybe 2 metres wide, the ledge continuing on the other side, but too far away for us to jump to it. Without the light, I couldn't make out where, if anywhere, the crack in the rock led. "Gary, I need the lamp." Instead of handing it to me, he walked to my side, his rough hands on my arm, a promise that if he tripped and fell, he'd take me with him. Tentatively, he leaned out and aimed the fluttering beam into the shadows. They parted reluctantly, as if this was the first time they had ever seen light. The crevice thinned to a point. There was no passageway. "Look up," I commanded. If I'd spoken to Gary like this in Furnace, then he'd have shanked me without thinking twice. But down here, things were different. He tilted his head back, rocking unsteadily on the edge of the precipice and digging his fingers into my bruises. The pain was worth it, though, as the weak glow picked out another peak of rock that led off into the shadows. I had my mouth open to point this out when the noise came again, and the way it dropped screeching from the very darkness I was looking at made it clear where it was coming from. "Find another way," said Gary, his voice dead. There is no, I started, but before I could finish, his hands had left my overalls and were around my neck. He swiveled, twisting his body, and mine, until I was scrabbling for purchase on the lip of the ledge. I could feel the cold air of the river below me, like an icy tongue trying to pull me in, and for a moment I thought I was falling. I said, find another way, said Gary, or you go swimming. Gary, yelled Z. But I didn't fight. Part of me wanted him to let go, drop me to my death. Part of me wanted to become a ghost, just so I could see him struggle to find a way out without me, just so I could laugh as he slowly starved to death at the bottom of the world. I almost said as much, but thankfully I managed to keep my mouth shut. You don't call the bluff of people like Gary. There is no other way, I repeated, never taking my eyes off his. We can't go back. We can't make that jump to the other side of the ledge. We don't have a choice. What's that down there? Said Z. I dropped my gaze, and Gary saw that as a sign of submission. Hauling me back onto the ledge, he pushed Z aside and looked down into the crack. I joined them, peering past their tangled limbs to see a ragged circle of darkness a few metres below us. That's a tunnel, right? It might not be, I answered. The hole in the rock didn't look much wider than any of us, and the thought of climbing into it, not knowing where it led or how much more it shrank, made my stomach churn. We're better off heading up anyway, even if that is a tunnel. It looks like it goes deeper. Doesn't matter, said Gary, not going anywhere near the Weezers. There was no arguing with him. With another eerie dance of light and shadow, he started climbing down the vertical scar, grunting as he eased himself towards the hole. This is wrong, I said to Z. I've got a really bad feeling about this. We should be heading up. But even as I said it, another guttural scream skidded down the wall like fingernails on a blackboard, and before it had ended, Z was following Gary. I would happily have left them to it, so great was my terror of crawling even deeper into our stone sarcophagus. But if I let them go, I'd be alone in the darkness, and that would truly have driven me to insanity. This is wrong, I said again to deaf ears. Then I grabbed hold of the rock, swung my body around, and descended into the abyss. Oh, that's my worst nightmare. The throat. It seemed to take forever to climb down that fractured wall. It was so dark that I had to run my fingers over the slick, cold rock to find a grip, and pretty much every step I took, one of my feet would slip, threatening to plunge me into the void. I felt like a piece of bait, a maggot pinned on a hook and squirming in pain as I was lowered towards the throat of some nightmare predator. By the time I'd reached the hole, 3 more haunting calls had dropped from the ledge above, each louder and more frenzied than the last. My damned imagination projected the image of the Weezers onto the stone in front of me, hundreds of them swarming over each other like flies over a corpse. It was crazy, of course. There couldn't have been that many of them, but the growing volume of the shrieks made it clear that the crowd up there was swelling. "Move it!" came a voice from below. I assumed it was Gary's, but when I angled my head down, I saw Z directly beneath me, clinging to the lip of the darkness and gesturing me on with his head. Gary was next to him, on the other side of the opening. I wasn't sure why neither of them had climbed in, but I should have guessed. "Ladies first," hissed Gary, when I scrabbled down the last stretch and braced my foot in the hole. "You've got the light," I protested. I should have saved my breath. "Won't tell you again," the bigger boy growled. "Get in there." I looked at Z, but he didn't meet my eyes. Not that I blamed him. The tunnel was barely wide enough for any of us to clamber into, the same width and height as a coffin. Oh. Cursing with every foul word I knew, I dropped past Z and thrust my head into the shadows. The air inside had none of the freshness of the river. It was hot and heavy, like the breath of some ancient creature, like it had been back in the prison. "This is wrong," I said again, the darkness swallowing my words so quickly that neither Gary nor Z seemed to hear them. Biting my lip to stop myself from screaming, I eased my shoulders into the throat and shuffled until my entire body was inside. The panic set in Immediately, the feeling that there was no oxygen and that the rock pressed against my stomach and my back was closing in, crushing my lungs. I tried to reverse. Better to fall to my death in the river or be caught by the wheezers than to die cowering in some hole, clawing for the last scrap of air. But Gary was already halfway in. The light from his helmet barely had enough room to squeeze past me, and by its strained yellow fingers I could see the red, ragged walls of the tunnel shrinking in on each other ahead. I thought back to the things that had happened in general population, the main prison. I remembered the time Z and I had been chased by the dogs, rescued by Donovan, the day I'd nearly been caught by Moleface as I crawled free of room 2, the fight between me and the skulls in the arena, the moment we'd made our break, Toby and I held up by giant hands as the fuse burned down towards the explosive gloves. At the time, each one of those events had been terrifying, and I'd been convinced that death had finally caught up with me. As I looked back now, however, everything that had happened up top seemed like a game, like a school trip. I wished I was back in my cell, Donovan by my side, laughing about Z having to clean the toilets or something. Because compared to the guts of Furnace, to the merciless river and this gullet of ancient rock, Genpop was a country club. "Go!" Gary said, his voice muffled. I took as big a breath as I could, then eased my way deeper, my elbows grating against the stone as they pushed me along. With every movement, the claustrophobia threatened to consume me, and several times I had to stop as the fear rang bells in my brain, making my entire body convulse. I don't know how long we were in that tunnel. It could have been a lifetime. Each agonising inch seemed to take hours. And every time I managed to wrench my body forwards, I thought it would be my eternal resting place. Somewhere in my mind, I pictured what would happen if I did just die. Gary and Z would have to retreat backwards down the pipe. Then I imagined Gary's fate if both Z and I were to perish right here, trapped between two corpses as the darkness came to collect him. Despite the horror of the thought, or maybe because of it, I started to laugh again. Shallow gasps that sounded more like sobs. "You see anything?" came Gary's voice after what might have been an hour, or a day, or a minute. "Air's getting thin in here. Better be a way out ahead." "Nothing," I replied after another age. "Tunnel's dropping." It was. The angle getting steeper, sloping downwards. It was narrowing too. I could feel its cold embrace on both my shoulders, its knuckles on my scalp. "We have to go back. There's no room." "Can't go back," came Z's voice, faint and echoey, like it was coming from a mile away. "No way, we can't turn around." "Right, we go on. Just go on," Gary said, although his voice was a whisper, broken up by the breaths he snatched in after every word. This was hell for me, but for him, with his tree-trunk chest, it must have been infinitely worse. I wiped the sweat from my brow and obeyed, feeling the blood rush to my head as I wormed down the slope. The tunnel was becoming less smooth, blades of ragged stone jutting out at every angle and threatening to slice my arms to shreds. It only got worse up ahead, the broken walls forming a knot of stone that was so tight I couldn't see what lay beyond it. "Dead end," I said, shuddering to a halt. "There's no way we'll get past that." "Don't stop," Gary barked, as if by shouting the words he could somehow weaken the blockage ahead. I felt his hands on my legs, pinching and pushing, and I could picture his fat lips sucking down all the air. It was all I could do not to lash out, kick him until he wasn't breathing anymore. But instead I opened my mouth and flooded my lungs with oxygen until the panic had gone. Then I shuffled onwards, praying we'd be able to find a way through. I don't know if anything heard me. "Elsie, I'm busy. I'll come down in a minute." "I don't care. Go downstairs, sweetie." "Sorry." "Elsie, please, sweetie. I'm reading it out to everybody." "Elsie, come on." "Elsie, it's a really exciting bit, and everyone wants to hear it. Okay? I'll come down in a minute and I'll get you some food." "I'll just take them off."
Why?
"I'll see you in a bit. Please, lovely. Close the door, sweetie, behind you." "Elsie, come on." She's really hungry, apparently. Oh. Okay. Right then. Sorry about that. Dead end! I can't even remember where I got to, but I'll start from here. Dead end, I said, shuddering to a halt. There's no way we'll get past that. Don't stop, Gary barked, as if by shouting the words he could somehow weaken the blockage ahead. I felt his hands on my legs, pinching and pushing, and I could picture his fat lips sucking down all the air. It was all I could do not to lash out, kick him until he wasn't breathing anymore, but instead I opened my mouth and flooded my lungs with oxygen until the panic had gone. Then I shuffled onwards, praying we'd be able to find a way through. I don't know if anything heard me. I can't see how. I mean, we were crawling through a stone coffin with more than a mile of solid rock and a hell of a lot more worthy prayers above our heads. But when we reached the last knot, I saw that it wasn't as tight as I'd first thought. The tunnel was blocked by a shard of stone hanging from the ceiling like a guillotine blade, and a short distance past that was a solid mound that rose from the floor. As if they'd been any closer together, then we would have rotted right there. But it looked like there was just enough room to weasel past. I pushed my head beneath the blade, its unforgiving edge scraping the hair from my skull and gouging its mark along my neck. I pushed hard with my feet, yelling in pain as I wrapped my arms around the mound and pulled myself up. For a moment I thought the angle was too much, that my spine would just snap. But then I squeezed my bony backside through the gap and was free. To my utter relief, the tunnel seemed to have widened out on this side of the knot, and as Gary's head emerged from the twisted rock, I saw why. The throat had opened up into a cavern, so big that the writhing helmet lamp failed to illuminate a floor, a ceiling, or even the walls. It was like we'd emerged in deepest, darkest space, with only a crumbling ledge between us and infinity. "Give me a hand," wheezed Gary, his words close to cries of distress. "I'm stuck!" It would have been so easy to leave him there, caught fast in a bear trap of solid stone, to steal the helmet and just run. Only I could hear Z's frantic cries squeezed from the tunnel, begging us to hurry up. I knelt and grabbed Gary's trembling arms, feeling the hot, sticky sheen of blood on his skin. He burst free with such a comical speed that I swore I could hear a pop. His momentum caught me off guard, and together we tumbled down a slope and crunched to a halt on the cavern floor. I was the lucky one, landing on Gary's chest so hard that a fountain of blood arced up from his lips, silhouetted against the flickering light. He coughed wetly, then shoved me off, groaning as he sat up. "You did that on purpose," he said, but the words carried none of their usual force. Gary was a tank, but something bad had happened inside him. You couldn't bleed like that and still have all your guts intact. "You okay?" I asked. He looked up at me, his face barely visible beneath the lamp on his helmet, and his expression seemed like one of surprise. "Oh, I'm gonna be," he said eventually. "Gonna be fine, as soon as we get out of here." "Guys," came a voice from above our heads, further up than I thought. How did you get down there? I can't see anything." "We rolled," I suggested. "Rolled?" echoed Z. I could hear him muttering as he tried to scramble down the slope. There was a clatter of stones on the floor, followed by a squawk as he fell. He staggered, then found his feet, chuckling with relief. "Oh, thank Christ we made it out of there. I thought I was going to die with Gary's butt in my face." "Hey man, you all right?" Gary snorted, and I wondered if it had been a laugh. He wiped his hand across his mouth, giving himself a bandana of blood. Then he tried to stand. It took him a couple of attempts, and by the time he was upright, he was swaying and panting equally hard. "Just took a few hits, that's all. Not the first time I've had the crap beaten out of me. That river was a pansy compared to my old man." Z and I exchanged a look that neither of us could really interpret. Then we turned our eyes in the direction of Gary's beam. The darkness in the cavern was so profound that it seemed to devour the sickly light before it could travel more than a couple of metres. But every now and again, as it swept across the floor, the golden edge of a stalagmite would rise up from the shadows before fading as the search continued. "You reckon there's a way out from here?" said Z, helping me to my feet. I didn't dignify his stupid question with an answer. I just followed Gary as he set off across the cavern. Each step we took echoed from the ceiling. God only knew how far above our heads. The muffled sound like the patter of giant raindrops. It was enough to make me smile, until I realised there was something wrong with the sound. "Just stop a minute," I whispered, halting and grabbing Gary's shirt to make sure he did the same. I felt Z's hand on my shoulder, but despite the fact we were all as silent and still as the stone pillars around us, the sound of footsteps didn't recede. There was the distinct slap of bare feet on wet rock, followed by its echo. 2 steps, 3, 4, and then silence. "What was that?" I asked, realising that my question was as pointless as Z's. "Probably just water dripping," Z suggested. "That's how these form, stalagmites and stalactites. I saw it on a documentary once with my mum and dad. Know how to remember the difference between the two?" There was no answer, except for the patter of light steps, faster this time, like someone running. "That's not water," said Gary, turning and pointing the lamp behind us. The whole cave seemed to move as the beam swept around, shadows coming to life like beetles. More steps, off to the left, the clack of insect legs. "There!" said Z, pointing in the direction of the sound. "No! Further over!" The lamp lurched, picking out another needle of stone that rose from the floor nearby. Only this one had 2 silver eyes which reflected the light back at us like distant planets. The shadow screamed, a vast wet maw opening in the misshapen lump where its head should be. Then it lunged forwards. In the split second before Gary ripped the light away, I made out a body of glistening sinew, packed with muscles, too large for its skin, and stitched together like a rag doll. I assumed it was a dog, only it was pounding towards us on 2 feet and reaching its skeletal fingers out for our throats. Then the darkness of the cavern washed over it, leaving only the relentless slap of its feet and the gargle of blood in its throat to let us know that death was approaching. Ah! Okay, I better leave it there because, as you heard, Elsie is hungry. I'm sorry about that. It came right in one of my favourite parts of the book, and the part I found one of the most difficult parts to write, when they're crawling through that throat of rock in the tunnels beneath Furnace. But there you go. Maybe we needed a bit of light relief to make it a bit more bearable. I will be back tomorrow, providing this cough doesn't get any worse. I hope it's just a regular cough. I hope you're all well. I hope none of you have a cough, and I hope that you will join me here tomorrow for part 17. Okay, see you later, guys. Bye.